There is more and more evidence that there is an immune inflammatory process going on in more than 80% of these children. Find a doctor who understands that autism is medical.
I forget that I see this kind of stuff every day, and I forget that people that don't see these kids every day and see them better don't know that that can happen.
I started to read many journal articles. Come to find out there were many journal articles that the doctors weren't reading.
What's going on? Why is it going on? How did this happen?
Most of the research dollars were going into genetics, and I knew there had to be an environmental factor. Gluten intolerance is glyphosate poisoning.
We're bathed in chemicals. Look around you.
We're physically poisoning the earth, and we're physically poisoning the children.
You hear from your conventionally trained doctor that diet has no influence on autism. That's nonsense.
And if you can fix what's wrong with the gut, then your child can learn what they couldn't before.
So we started hitting new levels.
Within 48 hours, he had gone from completely nonverbal, no sounds that even remotely sounded like the English language, to speaking in sentences.
What's that from? What's that from?
Where's that from? Mr. Grasshopper. Which color wiring can do you like?
Flip the right switch and miracles can happen.
Oh my goodness, there's something I can do about this. This is an autoimmune disorder. This is a metabolic disorder. This is a digestive disorder.
It helped me with my life. It actually did. And I think that's just amazing.
And I strongly suggest you open your eyes to possibilities.
What we've done is taken away the things that held them back and made them sick and made them, unable to face the world. Now we're able to see who they really are, and it's beautiful. It's amazing.
Which is possible your child actually is a genius.
Hi everyone, welcome. My name is Julie Lapidus, and I am the author of the forthcoming book, The Autism Generation. We are very excited to have everyone here tonight. This is our Autism and Leucovorin panel. We have an outstanding panel for you here tonight. Thank you for everyone who's joining us here live or on the recording. The event is called The Autism and Leucovorin, Perspectives from Parents to Physicians. And we're really excited to get into that tonight about all the different perspectives from our different panelists. So for those of you who don't know, leucovorin is folinic acid. It is the first FDA-approved treatment for the core symptoms of autism, which was talked about 6 months ago at the White House press conference, if you didn't hear about it in the news. And so we're going to be talking about some of the more specifics and nuances of this treatment that were often not in the news articles, such as the fact that you need to do a special diet, the casein-free diet, for it to be effective. And also, it isn't a treatment for everyone. It's specifically for cerebral folate deficiency. So we're going to start with having each of the panelists introduce themselves. So Dr. Centers, can you introduce yourselves for everyone here joining us in the audience?
My name is Dr. Sean Centers. I've been treating children with autism for about 25 years or more. I first started treating children with autism in 1999. Now, just so that you know, I was born with a very rare syndrome called Mobius syndrome, and so I have very little movement of my facial muscles. And so I kind of know what it's like to be that neurodivergent child because I was that child. And none of the treatments that I received as a child really worked. In fact, many times they did the opposite of what they were supposed to do. For example, one time I nearly died because of a failed surgery. And then my experience in the medical field really directed me to do this type of integrative care. So that's kind of my story.
Ryan, you share a bit about yourself for the audience here tonight?
Yeah, I'm Ryan Hetrick. Thanks again for the invite to participate. So I've been in the behavioral health field for over 20 years. And in that journey, I found out how important biomedical treatment is and how it integrates, should be sort of first in line before the behavioral. And, I discovered that with one of the families I was working with. And it was so prominent that I tried to describe that to my other colleagues and other families to get them to try, biomedical therapies. But it was actually out of frustration that I ended up directing the documentary Restoring Balance, Autism Redefined. And, that's to help motivate and inspire families so that they can see practitioners and visual examples and other testimonials all in one place, so they can really understand how important biomedical treatment is. So I'll be focusing on some of the parents from the documentary and their stories who had tried Leucovorin. And make sure to check out the full documentary. You can see it on our website, restoringbalanceautism.com.
And Sarah, can you share a little bit about yourself? Introduce yourself for the audience here tonight.
Hi everyone, my name is Sarah Perez. I'm a mom of 2 and I am currently studying nutrition. My son Ezra was diagnosed autistic level 3 2.5 years ago, and that is what led us on this biomedical journey of actually helping him in nutrition, helping him with Leucovorin calcium. And I'm just excited to be here because I have so much to share and also so much hope to give those parents who are given that life sentence, because that's what we were given. But we are here now, 2.5 years later, seeing progress in my now 4-year-old son, and I am happy to share.
Austin, can you share a little bit more about yourself for everyone here watching?
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much, Julie. So I've been volunteering with Children's Health Defense, specifically in the Arizona chapter, for a little over 5 years now. That's just out of an abundance of passion and really not just a desire, but a need to share and support the cause of holistic nutrition, health, and wellness as a whole. And Children's Health Defense turned out to be a really nice way to show up in the community and do that. I have been doing organic gardening, regenerative organic gardening for a long time, and have started to consult on that with home gardeners that want a little bit of guidance. And then I also do private catering, whole food catering.
Well, thank everyone for being here today, all the panelists, and thank CHD TV for hosting us, as well as Children's Health Defense of Arizona chapter. My name is Julie Lapidus, and I am the author of the forthcoming book that'll be coming out on July 21st, 2026, The Autism Generation, Understanding the Autism Epidemic from Causes to Solutions. And it's being published with Skyhorse and Children's Health Defense. And it's a very comprehensive approach on the topic, covering the autism epidemic, the causes, and how to best help children on the autism spectrum to thrive. I'm also the CEO and founder of Autism Evolution, which provides a comprehensive, holistic approach to helping children on the spectrum. I'm really excited to be here with all of you today and grateful to have the opportunity for us to each share and see how we can best help support these children for those watching. We're going to go ahead and get started with our very first question here. Can you tell us a bit about your story and what got you interested in autism? Let's start with Brian.
Whenever I was growing up, like Dr. Center said, I felt like I had a connection to these children because I was diagnosed with ADD, and I went the Ritalin route and all that, and didn't end up being a good compatibility. So, there was a lot of different therapies and such that just made me not feel like myself, and felt like I was even on an overdose of Ritalin at that point, the side effects from the medications. So, I felt like extra connected with these kids in the beginning, and especially someone not listening to how they feel. And, so when I was doing the, behavioral therapy, and I was seeing with this one family in particular, these leaps and bounds that, their child was taking, and it was due to diet and supplements, which was something, I'd never been talked about in my training. It wasn't mixing. It was like, my mind was exploding inside. Like, how come no one is talking about this? And, as I mentioned earlier, when trying to tell colleagues or family and friends, some who, are in the behavioral health field as well. And they just really didn't believe that. I was also had a background in filmmaking and really never had any intention in making documentaries. But it came to be that out of frustration that I thought there has to be a place where families and other practitioners can be motivated to see, all these testimonials in one place with animation and other doctors explaining the why behind biomedical, because, back when I was young, no one was listening about how I felt. And so I knew that communicating to these families and other doctors that were going to try this, it was important for them to consider it. And so I was hoping that it can contribute to be their voice, a crack in the door for the motivation for other families. And so hopefully it continues to do that.
Dr. Centers, can you answer the same question?
I am a child of the 70s. When I grew up in the 70s, I didn't have any classmates that were autistic. It was a very rare thing to see a child with autism. In 1970, the rate of autism was 1 in 10,000 children. So compare that to things like congenital heart disease, which is 1 in 600, or Down syndrome, which is 1 in 450 children. Autism was the rarest of rare disorders. So I had never seen a child. I saw one child with autism when I was a resident, and that was in a developmental rotation that I did. And we saw the one child over a period of 1 month. So my 1 month rotation, I saw this one child with autism. And that was the only child I had ever seen until I started working in California in 1999. And autism was increasing. When I came to California, it was 1 in 200 children. And down the street from my medical practice was a group called Autism Research Institute. And one day, this very kind fellow came to our office and introduced himself, and his name was Bernard Rimland. And Bernard Rimland is very famous in the autism community because he's the scientist that coined the term autistic spectrum disorders. And his son was in the movie Rain Man, or the movie Rain Man was about his son. And he did not believe that autism was caused by the parents, which in the 1980s, the 90s, even early 2000s, that was a strong consensus. People believed that autism was primarily caused by the cold, uncaring mother that they called a refrigerator mother. And that just wasn't true for his child or his wife. And so he had done all these studies on autism, and he said, hey, we're doing this thing down at one of the hotels in San Diego. It's called the Dan Conference. Why don't you come down? I'll let you in for free. We won't charge you. I know you're a young physician, so come and see, what we have. And so I went down there, and again, I had no patients that were autistic. And so slowly over time, ARI started sending me patients, and I started working with them. And I was told in medical school that the only treatment for a child with autism was antipsychotic drugs like Risperdal or Risperidone. And so we started using some of the methods that the Dan protocol was encouraging, like the casein and gluten-free diet. And suddenly, these patients who were severely autistic began to say words and began to come alive. It was totally amazing to me. And that's how I got involved in this practice.
The next question I have for Sarah is, can you tell us a bit about your journey and what helped your son Ezra to thrive?
Ezra was 2.5 when he was diagnosed autistic level 3. Going back and sitting in that evaluation, I was given little hope. I was told I will be changing his diapers for the rest of his life. I was told he would be nonverbal and to just be ready for that type of journey. I remember getting out of that evaluation and just looking up what can help my autistic son. I didn't know what autism was. I didn't know what to do, I was just given a paper with the list of ABA therapies. And there was a link that talked about a child being nonverbal level 3. And I dig more into it. I found Dr. Centers and I called and I told them, I just need help. Is there any way that you can help me? This is what I'm being told. And they told me this is the place. This is where we can help you. I went to Dr. Centers. I gave him all of our medical history. I gave him all of Ezra's history, all of his behaviors. It was a very long consultation, but it was one that was very worth it because it was life-changing for my son. We removed gluten, dairy, soy, sugar, processed food, and seed oils the moment that we walked out of Dr. Centers' consultation. And Dr. Centers did testing and just really looked at Ezra, not the behaviors, but he looked at what was really going on in his body. Everything that we've done these last 2.5 years with the guidance of Dr. Centers brings us to where we are at today with a 4-year-old who is speaking sentences now. He is sleeping through the night. There's so much progress that he has made. That is our journey in these last 2.5 years.
What a great example, like we saw in the trailer, of the parents sharing that when those changes happen and the body can heal itself, then your child can learn the things that they couldn't learn before because of the blockages in their body that preventing them from that.
The next question we have here is for Dr. Centers. Can you tell us, leucovorin is folinic acid, and as I mentioned earlier, it's the first FDA-approved treatment for the core symptoms of autism. Can you tell us more about leucovorin and what it is specifically?
So leucovorin is actually folinic acid that's conjugated or bound to calcium. So when you look at leucovorin, it's always in the calcium salt form. There are various forms of folic acid. So the most common form that people would be familiar with is what they call folic acid. So folic acid is synthetic. It's man-made. It's something that's a byproduct of several different chemical processes. The body itself does not make folic acid, and in most cases, it doesn't metabolize folic acid. And then there's natural folate. Natural folate is in certain foods like leafy green vegetables. It's in citrus fruits. It's in a number of other things. So you ideally should get folate in its active form from your diet. But most children would not get the active form from their diet. So what they did starting in the late 1980s is they started putting folate into all certain foods, especially processed foods, primarily wheat. So, and this was from studies that were done that showed that when a mother was low in folate, then they had a much higher chance of having a child with spina bifida. So then the US government required folic acid to be placed in all cereals, wheat products, and a lot of other foods. So anything that is enriched will have to have folic acid. It's part of the law. And this law is in the United States, and also it's in Mexico. So folic acid, though, there's a certain percentage of the population that cannot metabolize it. So in most vitamins that you take into your body, you have to activate the vitamin. And most vitamins are not in their active form. But in the body, for the cells to use the vitamins, they have to be activated. And usually this is done through an enzyme. So in the case of folate, the enzyme is called methyl tetrahydrofolate reductase. So anytime you hear the ASE at the end of a sentence, that means it's an enzyme. So methyl tetrahydrofolate reductase is the enzyme that takes a methyl group and puts it onto folic acid or a folate and makes it active. So if you have folic acid that's synthetic in your body and you have that enzyme, it will change it into folinic acid, the active form of folate, and it's very important. It's important for nerve function, it's important for the brain, for language, it's important for many, many different processes in the body. I think there's like over 180 different processes that folic acid is involved in. So if you, though, are lacking the enzyme to activate the folate, then it never becomes active. We don't even know exactly what happens, but it's probably not good. It just kind of hangs out in the cell with no actual use. 25 years ago, there was a scientist in Sweden who was a geneticist, and they discovered something pretty amazing called FOKR1 deficiencies. And this is a genetic disorder where you have this marker called FOK1, and FOK1, when you have it, it means that you cannot make the methyl tetrahydrofolate reductase. If you can't make it, then what will slowly happen as you grow is your body will become deficient in folinic acid, especially in the brain. When your body becomes deficient in folic acid in the brain, you have severe consequences. It will cause seizures. It will cause you to not be able to speak. You will lose all language. You will be almost like a vegetative state. So when they found this, they said, oh, well, I wonder what would happen if we gave an active form of folate, like leucovorin or folinic acid. And so they did this, and they did it in really high doses, much higher than what we typically give for treating children with autism. And when they did that, these children like woke up. Just imagine this child in the intensive care unit, having 100 seizures a day, can't speak, is incontinent, has very little function, is almost like in a vegetative state. And suddenly you give them this medicine and they wake up and their whole physiology normalizes. So it was almost like a miracle. There was a researcher who was here in Arizona. Actually, at first he was in Arkansas. That's where he did a lot of his initial research. Richard Fry, and Dr. Fry looked at this and he said, oh, I wonder if, these symptoms that these children have with this gene deficiency is very similar to children who have autism. What would happen if you gave them leucovorin?
What year was that? Do you know about what time frame that happened?
That was probably in the mid 1980s, around 85 or 86, I would think.
Yeah, amazing.
And then around 2010, Dr. Fry started presenting his findings with children with autism. As I was telling you about this enzyme, methyl tetrahydrofolate reductase, there's large amounts of the population in the United States that are missing this gene or certain parts of this gene. So they're only partly able to activate the folic acid.
And is that our like the extent of our current understanding of how much and how often that deficiency exists with the MTHFR enzyme?
One of the things that Dr. Fry started looking at is he wanted to know why. He's been very, very involved in the Defeat Autism Now, the integrative approach to autism, since probably 2000. And so he wanted to understand a little bit more why. And one of the things that he discovered was that there are antibodies that are sometimes made to the receptor sites in the brain that process the folic acid. So it's actually an antigen antibody disorder. Some children make antibodies to milk, and when they make those antibodies to milk, those antibodies, which are supposed to be to milk, they actually begin attacking the receptor in the brain that's responsible for folate metabolism.
The FRAs, right? FRAAs.
FRAA, called folic receptor antibody activity.
Earlier, you were talking about folate. So they thought, folate was causing spina bifida, right? They knew that. But then they put folic acid, which was synthetic, into the food supply. Would it have been better for them to put folinic acid in there, or is not?
Folinic acid is very expensive to make. And so, they're always going to do with the cheapest thing that they can find, right?
Right. Okay. But that would have been a better approach, I suppose.
So if they had done that, I don't think we would have as severe of an autism epidemic as we have now. You have to go back to the milk and the autoantibodies, right? So part of the reason that you're reacting to these autoantibodies is that the type of milk that we are drinking in the United States has changed. Began in the 1960s. And there was this supposed research that is now considered to be invalid that showed that high cholesterol from milk was associated with heart disease. People assumed, well, if you took the cholesterol or the fat out of milk, then you're going to improve the likelihood that you would get heart disease. So in the 60s and 70s, what did they tell you to do? They told you to drink low-fat 2% milk. The real problem really is, again, about the money. So it's always follow the money, right? They found out, well, the cheapest thing to do if you want to have low-fat milk is you need to get a cow that produces low fat. Now, back in the 1950s and 60s, almost all the cows in the United States were Guernsey cows, and they produced primarily a type of milk that was predominantly what we call A2 milk today. There's two types of proteins in milk, or two types of well-known proteins, alpha casein and beta casein, or A1 and A2 molecules. The Guernsey cows produced almost entirely A2 milk. A2 milk is much easier to digest, and most countries in the world have cows that produce A2 milk. But they found this very rare breed called Holstein cows, and Holstein cows produce much less fat in the milk, and they produce primarily A1. Go to someplace like India or where my wife is from, the Philippines, you'll see these really scrawny looking cows, Guernsey cows. But in the United States, the cows that we have, these Holstein cows, they're huge. And part of that is also because they're feeding them with hormones or injecting bovine growth hormone into their body.
Right. And then that shows how systemic our food system issue is connected to the health issues that we're seeing.
Right. And so when that happens, it's also, it changes the protein itself, the casein. When you try to digest casein that comes from A1 milk, primarily these Holstein cows. Most people, especially most children, can't digest it. So it's only partially broken down.
Can you explain, Ryan, what the biomedical approach for dealing with autism, addressing autism really means?
I think that Dr. Centers was talking about a lot of different angles that integrate. I mean, when we think of treatment for autism overall, I think the majority of the population, unfortunately, they think of just behavioral therapy, speech therapy, occupational therapies, things like that. And, biomedical is looking into the differences of biology of autism. And like Dr. Centers was saying, these are very sensitive kids. And so, all of those factors, while they seem like intricacies that we don't want to bother ourselves with, they take a toll cumulatively. So, biomedical treatments, they can be things focusing on like diet, like we said, supplements, vitamins, minerals, herbs, and like Leucovorin, prescription vitamins, basically. So, the idea though is mostly with biomedical, we're trying to balance out their system, and that usually involves removing inflammatory insults, from those areas. So they may have severe deficiencies, like we talked about with the cerebral folate situation. And then, if they have these inflammatory insults and with toxins, all of this is going to be an inflammatory burden. So, basically we just want to focus on removing as much of that as possible. Now, we talked about some of the stuff that's coming into the body, but biomedical is also not just what's happening in the body, but also in their environment. So, the child might be exposed to mold or pesticides or other chemicals, electromagnetic frequencies, all of these other things, again, that bother biology, that have an inflammatory burden. And so, I think that we need to make it more popular for biomedical treatment. It's driven by looking at biomarkers, so these differences in biology of someone that has a diagnosis on the autism spectrum versus someone that doesn't. So like one of those, Professor James Adams from Arizona State University is, developing a test and testing it about measuring bacteria and yeast metabolites to identify a child on the autism spectrum in comparison to ones that aren't. So, it'll help to identify earlier, because right now a lot of the diagnostics are on observational behavior, right? And how many tests of conditions do we have that are just based on observation, right? There's Barry Smeltzer in the documentary talks about, getting data, like when we break a bone, even though we observe that a bone is broken, we still do a test to confirm that the bone is broken. So we need to develop more tests for autism to basically measure these biomarkers, because they're now revealing themselves of these differences. And so, like with Leucovorin, what we're focused on today, basically, addressing these biomarkers surrounding the cerebral folate deficiencies, and changing the behavior of children in that way, and helping them, like Dr. Center said, but basically come alive, because if they're living with this severe deficiency, it's not just the autism symptoms. He's mentioning seizures. So, we talk about quality of life being addressed, focusing on the biology, and making sure that it's all encompassing to figure out what is setting off any kind of inflammatory cascade from the inside or from the outside. And, so I think that the more we can keep that in mind, that all these, children are dealing with. Last example I'll give is in the movie, Melinda Sharma's son, talks about when she goes gluten-free and dairy-free, the son, who's 9 years old at the time, says, "Mom, I don't have a headache anymore." And she says, "How long did you have a headache?" And he said, like, basically as long as I can remember. And so again, quality of life changes through biomedical approach seem like it should be kind of number one in the discussion. And it was one of the reasons I made the documentary, is because I felt like not enough people were talking about it. As dramatic as the results are, it's crazy to leave them on the table. But lastly, I'll say it's just money as well, because I think all these institutions, they don't want to open a new door, because the behavioral institutions, speech therapy and all that. How would your speech therapist feel if, normally it takes like a year to get from point A to point B at the goal you're going for. But let's say you try gluten-free diet, dairy-free, and maybe they needed the, folic acid. And all of a sudden they make that progress in 3 months or weeks in what would have taken them a year. So I think that, all these other established professions would have to reintegrate their knowledge of what autism is. And that's very inconvenient and expensive.
Sarah, can you tell us a bit about your son's journey using Leucovorin and his experience with it?
So we didn't start Leucovorin calcium until exactly 1 year ago this week. It's 1 year with Ezra being on Leucovorin calcium. So our protocol was very specific with Dr. Centers. He wanted Ezra to be on a very clean gut healing diet. And once we were able to rerun some tests showing that his comprehensive stool exam showed, great markers, that's when Dr. Centers said, it's time. It's time for the Leucovorin calcium. He started off slowly on it. I believe it was 5 milligrams once a day. And we seen just with those 5 milligrams within a week, Ezra was saying words that we didn't even know he knew. It was very surprising, but yet very encouraging because this is what we worked for. So to see something different, right? Because the whole journey we've seen progress, but to see something that seems so little to some just becomes such a huge milestone. We just knew, okay, we are headed in the right direction. We then attempted to up his dose. At the time, it was a non-compound version. And that is where we seen the hyperactivity. We just seen that dose was not a good fit for him. We went back to the 5 milligrams. And one thing that I've learned is slow and steady wins the race with Leucovorin calcium. Once we got back to the 5 milligrams and got him back to, his baseline, we did go the compound route. We ended up upping it to 10 milligrams once a day. And again, we seen a big jump in his attentiveness and his attention to detail and just more functional communication. But I do want to emphasize, because on our journey, diet, healing the gut has always been what has helped us get to where we are at with the boost of the help of the Leucovorin calcium. And I think I always emphasize that because it's so important. Ezra had mold, he had yeast. If we wouldn't have addressed the gut, do we really believe the Leucovorin calcium would work to its full potential?
Can you tell us a little bit more about the beginning of the journey for the first year? Sarah, what were you doing specifically with Dr. Centers for your son?
The first steps, Dr. Centers ordered a oats test, a comprehensive stool exam, mold test, and heavy metals test, and some blood work. And we found the mold, we found the yeast, and the heavy metals, and Dr. Centers did a protocol with supplements, essential oils, and also a few rounds of nystatin. While we were doing that, we were also doing osteopathic manipulation, biocharger, and he also did red light therapy, and I believe it's called cold laser therapy, if I'm not mistaken. So we did that once a month for a year on top of first removing the gluten, the dairy, and the soy. So that was finding alternatives, right? If Ezra was drinking milk, let's find an alternative, coconut milk. If he was eating cereal, let's find an alternative. They were not the healthiest things, I will emphasize that as well, but we were just simply removing what was causing inflammation to his body. Once we felt like Ezra's pellet started expanding, which was pretty quick, I would say within 6 months, his palate was just expanding. He would try anything on our plates. We ended up going the route of buying a whole steer that is grass-fed, grass-finished, buying organic chickens from a small farm with no hormones. We said, we're going to do it and we're going to do it right. We also started doing bone broth, chicken broth, and started eliminating those what's still considered processed food, cereals. He was eating rice At that time, we removed that for a while as well and just stuck to whole foods, low oxalate vegetables, very limited fruit because fruit does feed the yeast, so it was just a contradiction. So very limited fruit, and then your protein, chicken, a turkey, grass-fed, grass-finished beef, salmon. One thing I learned, if they are seeing what you're eating, they are more willing to eat it because that's all you have. It was an adjustment. It was sacrifice on my end, on my husband's end, on my daughter's end, but it was a sacrifice that was well worth it because leading up to that whole year, we seen a change. My son was a completely different person. Then we go that whole year. He then starts Leucovorin calcium, and I could say the same thing. My son is a whole different person than he was 1 year ago. He used to be aggressive, I would say maybe 20 times a day, and maybe that's not even enough that I'm keeping track of. He wasn't potty trained. He's now potty trained. He wasn't trying to conversate with us or be in the same world that we were in. And now he's telling us, I want this, I want that. He's trying to play with kids at the playground. He's engaging with his sister. And now he's even trying to speak Spanish, which is another plus. So again, it didn't happen overnight. It's been dedication. It's been sweat, blood, tears, but we are here, and I wouldn't have had it any other way.
Austin, we have a question from the audience. Do you want to ask it, or I can ask another question?
Yeah, that's right. We have somebody pointing out that some of the commercial medicines may have lactose in them. Can you comment on that, Dr. Centers, or any of you? Have you encountered that in your course of treatment?
A number of them have lactose and lactulose, and children who are sensitive to lactose can have problems with it. So lactose is not exactly the same thing as casein. So there are some children that don't have the effects. So it just depends on the child. So unfortunately, these pharmaceutical companies are not making these medicines for children with autism. Otherwise, they would not put these fillers into the medications, and they wouldn't make them so expensive. Some of these pharmacies, commercial pharmacies, are charging huge amounts of money for leucovorin because they know that autistic children are using it. It varies very widely. So, like, one pharmacy will charge $35 for 30 tablets, the same exact dosage and same number of tablets. Another pharmacy will charge $700. The allopathic medicine does not want us to use leucovorin. Since the Trump administration and Bobby Kennedy came out with these recommendations, it's become much more difficult.
Dr. Centers, does that connect to homeopathic medicine at all, where lactose is often used?
Some children will have less good effects with lactose homeopathic pellets, yes.
Yeah, so that's an excellent differentiation to know that lactose is not, or to remind us that lactose is not the same thing as casein. That lactose is a milk sugar, right? And casein is a milk protein.
A lot of times I will use glucose tablets for homeopathy, which you can get, or we'll use liquid tinctures. The liquid tinctures would have to come from a homeopathic pharmacy. When they make a homeopathic medicine, right, they take the medicine and they sprinkle it on top of the pellets. So it's not like it's mixed into the pellets. You can find pharmacies that use glucose, and you can even find sucrose. We typically, if a child has a reaction to the leucovorin tablets, we will get an excipient pre-compounded leucovorin.
Yep.
And in most cases, it's not as expensive as you would think. So maybe $80 to $100 for a 30-day supply.
I had another question for Ryan now. Can you provide us with an example from your documentary of someone with ASD who improved using glucovorin?
For Heidi, her son Ben, the segment that's in the documentary is actually on him going through the microbiota transplant from James Adams and Arizona State University. So he went through that and had some good results. But again, with biomedical, it's comprehensive. So Heidi was still considering, more things. And so she had found out about leucovorin after that and ended up trying that out with Ben. And so we'll see a sample of it here. Ben has tried multiple things. He definitely is big into diet, and he does exercise as well. So, there's a comprehensive thing, but Heidi found that, there was definitely benefit for Ben with this as well.
I made a dream room.
Ben Bonarotti is an artist. He recently graduated high school and just celebrated his 21st birthday.
Drawing, yeah.
You're really gifted at drawing and painting, aren't you?
Yeah.
In the past few months, his mom Heidi has started to notice some changes in Ben's behavior.
We saw subtle but significant changes in Ben. He would say, "Hey Mom, look, that's a beautiful sunset." He would text his friends spontaneously.
Ben was diagnosed with autism just before his 3rd birthday.
Where do you start?
Occupational therapy, speech therapy, physical therapy, equestrian therapy with the horses. Do you remember that on the horses?
Yeah.
Yep. And music therapy. I mean, you name it, we did it.
But they recently found a new type of treatment.
We started out small doses.
Leucovorin, it's been around for decades and primarily used to protect healthy cells from the effects of cancer treatment. On Monday, the Food and Drug Administration announced it was expanding its label to reflect its potential benefit for treating symptoms of autism.
We have patients coming to us here in Chandler from all over the U.S., and actually we have a large amount of patients coming from Mexico. And so of those patients, we would say that about 75% make significant progress.
Individuals with a cerebral folate deficiency have been observed to develop autistic symptoms. This medicine helps transport that essential vitamin to the brain.
What I see is improved language, improved behavior, social skills, etc. And we see that with a large proportion of children who are taking the leucovorin.
Dr. Sean Centers is a homeopathic physician. He said the wrong dosage could lead to hyperactivity or gastrointestinal problems.
It's an Eiffel Tower.
For Heidi, she's excited to see Ben continue to progress and find his voice.
Last night, we were driving through the neighborhood, and he looks out the window and he says, "Hey, look, those kids are on a slip and slide."
Yeah.
And I looked over like, and then he started giggling. And I said, "Ben, why are you giggling?"
Because I'm thinking about something silly.
Ben Brown, ABC 15, Arizona.
So Dr. Centers, is there anything else that you're able or wanting to talk about with regard to the video clip we just watched?
Yes, so he made a lot of improvements from the leucovorin. He had been seen by Arizona State many years ago for the microbial transplant, and that is an up-and-coming therapy. It's actually fecal microbial transplant, which was originated in Israel. What they would do is they would take the fecal matter from one person who was healthy and transfer it into someone who is not healthy. That sounds really bizarre, but they've done amazing things in Israel with that therapy. For example, people who had type 2 diabetes would have these fecal microbial transplants, and their diabetes would go away. People who had Crohn's disease, which is a very serious disease of the colon, they would do these transplants and their symptoms of Crohn's disease would go away. Dr. Jim Adams has been studying this for 20 years, as long as I have known him. So now it's no longer fecal microbial transplants. So what they do is they look at the healthy feces of an individual and they take that bacteria and now it's put in a capsule or a liquid and the person ingests it. So it's not really a transplant anymore. It's just they're transplanting the good bacteria that you need.
So as we talked about a little bit at the beginning. Leucovorin is specifically used to treat cerebral folate deficiency. And so there was actually a meta-analysis conducted by Daniel Rossignol and Dr. Richard Fry, who've been talking a bit about during this panel, in 2021. And they found overall that 38%, so almost 40% of children with ASD have cerebral folate deficiency. So Dr. Centers, can you explain to us what CFD, cerebral folate deficiency, is for those who don't know?
Cerebral folate deficiency is when you're deficient in folate in your brain. Cerebral means brain. So, like I had discussed before, this can be extremely severe if it's caused by a gene mutation, the FOKR1 gene mutation. And it can be milder if it's caused by other things like these folate autoantibodies or by some type of methylation problem. Now, that study that you're quoting, there's another study that I think is actually more significant that was done in China, the China study on leucovorin. They had a much larger cohort, meaning a lot more kids involved in the study. And one of the things that's very interesting that they did is they looked at the gene deletions in regards to methylation. So this is the MTHFR gene. And they were able to define and establish which children who had these mutations the leucovorin would work for the best. That's called the China study, and that's very significant. So anytime we do treatment with leucovorin, we will do the genetic testing, especially the methylation testing.
The China study, what was different with that one versus the study, the scientific review I was referring to?
The difference is that Dr. Fry and Rossignol, they were looking at the folate autoantibodies. There's a test that you can do called the FRAT test, folate receptor antibody test. The 40% that they're talking about in that study are those children that actually had autoantibodies to the folate receptor. Some children respond to the treatment even though they don't have a problem with autoantibodies. We think that those autoantibodies are coming from milk.
And so, Sarah, can you tell us a little bit about what did you feel was the most helpful for you during your son's biomedical journey?
What we see the most changes with is the whole body approach, right? Just looking at every single detail, looking at the root causes, looking at what is he sensitive to, genetics, methylation, just overall, every single area, we can't leave any area without looking at the reasoning behind it, right? We're so accustomed to just slapping a band-aid on things, but this journey, it just makes you see how the body works, how every single body is different, and just the way that you learn each day, you learn something different. Something I learned a few weeks ago on Ezra's sensitivities test is that he's sensitive to watermelon. I gave him watermelon and I'm like, why is he hyper? He's never been hyper. And we compare it to the results we got, and you understand why it's causing hyperness in him, right? These are things that we're not told anywhere else but with biomedical approaches. So I think just the whole body approach, the leucovorin addressing what it needs to address, the diet addressing the leaky gut, the osteopathic manipulation addressing what it needs to address. And that's what I always tell everyone is every child is different. One thing that works for my child may not work for yours, but that doesn't mean that there is something that will work. So again, just overall, everything that we've done with Dr. Centers, everything that he has guided us these last years is what has helped. I can't say one or the other is the pinpoint of it all, because it all just complements one another.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of what I've found too, is like a comprehensive, holistic approach is really helpful for these kids. And so I think a lot of people, when they hear about leucovorin, they center on this one thing. But what you're saying is very important, I think, for people to hear, is that it wasn't just the leucovorin that helped him; it was the whole body approach, and all of that went together. And I think that goes well into our next question. Can you tell us about the role that diet has in leucovorin treatment, and specifically, why does a casein-free diet matter?
When the FDA approved the use of leucovorin, there was some mistakes I think that they really made. There was a lot of pushback to Secretary Kennedy in what he wanted to do to advise children doing this kind of treatment to follow dietary protocols. And that there was a huge pushback from people within the CDC about this. So what they came out with was, okay, there's this medicine that cures autism, and try it out, see if it works. You have thousands and thousands of parents who are going to their pediatrician and saying, okay, I saw this on television. I want my child to have it. That was a big problem because, one, the pediatricians never read all the studies, particularly the studies about diet. So if you go back to that Rosignol and Fry study, they very specifically say, this therapy doesn't really work if you're eating casein. And it's not going to work if you're eating gluten that's full of folic acid, which will counteract the effects of leucovorin. The other big problem is they didn't give any specifications about how to deliver the leucovorin. So I saw cases of children who were started on huge doses immediately, and they had severe reactions. Some had seizures, some had extreme ADHD behavior. One child I saw hadn't slept for like 11 days after they started the leucovorin. And that child was started at 50 milligrams a day. So usually with a small child, we might start them 2.5 to 5, depending upon the child. They would need to be on a diet. We would have needed to really treat their body and eliminate all the junk in between. The problem is that there was no education to physicians, and the people who were responsible for this education, like the American Academy of Pediatrics, was telling physicians not to prescribe it. More of a political reason than a medical reason. And so I think that many autistic children were damaged and have had ill effects because of this indiscriminate prescribing.
Like we said with the education, I think that, we're looking in biomedical, the outsiders that are new are looking for, one thing that's going to solve everything, and that doesn't really exist. It has to be comprehensive. So unfortunately, there are many families, like Dr. Centers mentioned, that get into it with someone who might be not as educated. They give a wrong dose or something at the wrong time. There's a, side effect of negativity, and then they turn away from biomedical treatment and act like, it must not be for them. So I think that's why it has to be comprehensive. I mean, this is already an investment I get for parents, but, and it's going to be good, better, best, meaning, don't judge yourself at what you think you should be doing on the best level. Just start out with something good, like, Sarah said, with the replacements of coconut milk or whatever. If you had a house and you had a hole in the roof, you're not going to replace the flooring while you have the leaking from the roof. So, just like the gut, Sarah said about the sensitivity to watermelon, we're going to see in a clip in the future a little bit from Marsha showing all these things that Ryan was sensitive to. And, that didn't stay forever. So I think with biomedical treatment, it's important to be comprehensive because, and diet is the cornerstone because, in trying to solve the leaky gut, one of the words I like is, we have to stop the gut from leaking inflammagens into the system. So if you're taking something like Leucovorin and you're paying for it, why would you allow your child to consume something that they have a reaction to? Of course, it's a challenge, so you might not be able to take everything out, but the major offenders, if you're going to be investing in one thing with biomedical treatment, there are some of the cornerstones that you have to make sure are there so that the investment's worth it. So that's why you can't ignore diet. It's a gradual thing. So also don't expect that you're going to get the diet down. The beginner version that you do of it is going to be way different than the version you're doing years later. And you'll gradually grow into that.
Well, why does a gluten-free, casein-free diet matter for leucovorin treatment?
So the casein part of the casein-free diet matters because the body can make auto-antibodies to the milk. The gluten part matters because gluten is naturally supplemented with folic acid, which is synthetic. The other thing is that most of the children who have problems with casein will have problems with breaking down gluten. My opinion is that sometimes children can tolerate gluten that's grown organically, especially if it comes from other countries. The other thing with gluten is that it's frequently sprayed with glyphosate. In gluten, you have high levels of glyphosate, which counteracts folic acid.
So what about the gluteomorphine and the opioid theory? Is that not so much an issue then?
So no, I think the casomorphine and gluteomorphine theory is very important. So as I was saying before, when you eat milk and your milk goes into the stomach, there's an enzyme in the stomach or stomach acid will break apart the protein. If it's milk, we call that protein casein. If it's wheat, we call that protein gluten. And it will break it apart into smaller parts. A protein is simply a group of amino acids that are holding or bound together. So most proteins have 40 amino acids in them. And if you break them apart to smaller parts, they call those peptides. Casein, which is milk, when it goes into your stomach, the stomach acid will break it apart. And sometimes what happens is it's broken apart into a small chain of 20 amino acids, and those 20 amino acids will go into your intestine, your small intestine, and then eventually your large intestine. And those peptides should be broken down into the amino acids, and the amino acids should cross over into the blood that's in your intestines. And then your body uses amino acids to build things like other enzymes. That doesn't happen though. What happens is that the peptides will stimulate certain receptors, especially opiate receptors. And so when the opiate receptors are stimulated, it causes an increase in opiate stimulation. So it's like you're taking an opiate, like morphine. So that's why we call it casomorphine, because it mimics the effects of morphine.
Sarah, can you tell us a little bit about, maybe there's some parents watching right now who are thinking, well, now I have to do this diet change. I thought this was about leucovorin. So can you tell us a little bit about, from your perspective, do you have any tips for parents watching on switching the diet and what that was like for you?
There is a study somewhere out there that says it takes X amount of times for a person to like something, and I've experienced it with myself. A lot of the times we're so quick to say, he didn't like it, I'm never gonna make it again, right? But it took me 30 years to like avocado, and it wasn't until Ezra started spooning the avocado and eating it that I'm like, I need to be like that. How is that so easy for you to eat? And sure enough, I tried it 10 times, 11, 12, and I finally started adapting to the taste that now I can eat an avocado like he can. So it's just not giving up after the first, second, third try. Continue. He will eat broccoli, he will eat celery, he will go and open the fridge, and if all I have is some lettuce in there, he will eat it. But that's because my husband and I have both agreed we're not going to give up after the first try. Maybe it'll be 10 times, but just continuing to show up in a way that is not pressuring them, I think that has also helped. I used to put out random vegetables on the table. He would touch them, he would smell them. That's okay. That's okay. We're getting somewhere, right? You're paying attention to what I'm doing different. We're eating them. We're saying, this is delicious. And one day he picked up the broccoli, and since then he hasn't stopped eating broccoli. But it's just being consistent on this journey, even on the days that you feel you are not seeing a change or a difference. It's usually after that where you're doubting yourself that you see something new appear on your journey.
A lot of it is about modeling and patience. You know, a lot of times if I've asked parents, you know, do you think so-and-so would try this? Their automatic response is always no. And, you know, I would just, if you model with them multiple times, even if it fails, I had a client that was drinking like a little cup of moringa with me. And this even brand of moringa was, you know, I've had different brands and this one was really bitter. It was awful. It was truly one of the worst green drinks I've ever had. But he would do, you know, this little thing he remembered from a show, and he would call it Monster Lemonade. And, you know, he would make this disgusted looking face in the mirror after he had it. And, you know, we just did a whole thing with it. But his mom, of course, at the beginning was like, no, he's not going to do this. He's not going to do it. But I did it with him. I showed him that I was doing it. And, you know, very shortly after, he was drinking moringa every day. So, you know, just have patience and stick with it.
Ryan, can you tell us a little bit about Marsha Hines' experience with her son, who's also named Ryan, that you filmed as part of your documentary, Restoring Balance, Autism Redefined?
She's had a ton of patience. I can't say enough great things about Marsha Hines. She was an integral part of the Restoring Balance documentary. It all started with her book, I Know You're In There. You can check that out on Amazon. She wrote that many years ago. And that book, I Know You're In There, is the journey of, you know, her helping her son Ryan through the biomedical protocols. And in this clip here, you'll see that she mentions leucovorin, but I want you to focus that she mentions diet, the importance of how, you know, that played a part. And then, you know, she mentions other things that they did as well in conjunction, you know, other types of supplements. So again, just to kind of emphasize that. And lastly, I'll say that aside from Marsha noticing that Ryan had a lot of improvement whenever he was on leucovorin, and that was something she stuck with, you know, their whole biomedical journey, she also tried it herself. She suspected she had the MTHFR gene mutation as well. And so, you know, she had tried it. And in the process of writing her book, she said that cognitively, she felt like she was able to write easier. She was able to have better reading comprehension, not having to go back and double check something. And she swears by it as well and still takes it to this day. So, you know, she wanted me to share that. It can be benefited in other ways. And, you know, maybe you have something as well if you do have that MTHFR gene mutation. So we'll take a look at this clip with Marsha, you know, going through some of the differences.
Sometimes our kids look like they're allergic to everything when they're really not. It's just that their immune system is so out of whack that they react to everything. And we did a blood test to check for sensitivities to food. And when we first did it, when Ryan was about 5, he came up allergic to everything. And I would wake up and I'd go, what the heck am I going to feed him? You know, there wasn't anything he didn't react to. And then after we helped his immune system with the antifungals and the antivirals and some of the other things that we did, like the leucovorin, we repeated the allergy test. And the interesting part was he was hardly allergic, or he was hardly sensitive to anything.
When Marcia mentioned that changed, and like, how Sarah mentioned that watermelon situation, that might not be food intolerances that are forever. So it's basically if the gut is leaky, and it has these holes for food material that's not supposed to be getting into the bloodstream, that layer's very thin. And so when it gets degraded and things leak into it, like the, casein and gluten and many other things like watermelon can, have a reaction. Another mom in the film, Jennifer, said that her son reacted crazy to peaches. And so those are foods that you wouldn't normally expect are causing inflammation. But, when Ryan had the leaky gut at the beginning of that test, like she said, it lit up like a Christmas tree. There are all these things. She had no idea what she was going to do. So don't be scared that that's forever. Once he was balanced out, once he healed that leaky gut, then she said, there weren't nearly as many things that he was intolerant to.
I have a question here for Dr. Centers now. Have you used a supplement form of folinic acid successfully in your practice, or what would you say about that, Dr. Centers?
The problem is that sometimes you can't get the doses that you need with that. You would have to be giving like huge amounts of the powder to the child. So sometimes it's easier to give the compounded formula or the prescription formula. The way that the FDA approves supplements is a little bit different than how they approve pharmaceuticals. So, for example, FDA approved Leucovorin, and it was approved for oncology patients. So when it's approved for oncology patients, they do lots of studies and they know that it's going to cross the blood-brain barrier. The problem is we don't really know. Spectrum has not done those studies that showed that the leucovorin actually, the folinic acid actually crosses the blood-brain barrier. I tend to use the prescribed form. In certain situations, we might use the spectrum form. For example, there are many countries that cannot get leucovorin. So like sometimes I speak to patients in India or patients in the Philippines, and it's just not available.
Are there other reasons some people are going towards a supplement versus a prescription that I'm not thinking of?
I would say that it's better to use the prescription form because we know about the bioavailability based on studies.
Sarah, what's your experience as a mom using leucovorin or folinic acid for your son? Did you have any issue with him becoming hyperactive or a bit aggressive at too high dosages? And how did you deal with that?
When we first introduced it, there was no hyperactivity. There was nothing out of the ordinary. He was the same Ezra, and like I said, within a few days, he was saying more words that we didn't know that he knew what it was, and it was appropriate, red ball, just describing more things. It wasn't until we did try to up his dose from 5 milligrams to 10 milligrams, where we kind of seen some of his previous behaviors, as in aggression and hyperactivity, reappear. But I wasn't scared. I went in with this knowing, just like anything, knowing that it's not always, all rainbows and sunshines, that, sometimes a supplement can even have its side effects, right? So we went into it knowing, and I feel like Dr. Centers did really good preparing us the whole year of what to expect, And so that was very helpful because he went out of his way to let us know, reach out to me if you see anything different. Let me know, I'm a text, I'm a phone call away. So that gave us a lot of peace of mind. When those behaviors did reappear, my husband and I, we knew. And we just put our poker face on and we said, okay, we're going to get down to your level, because that's how we've always been with him. We're going to get down to your level and we're going to try to understand why you're feeling this way. And I feel like at this point we had a lot more knowledge of what was going on in his body, that there's more behind this autism diagnosis, right? There's layers to take off. We just like to understand. We get it, buddy. There's something going on, but mom and dad are trying to fix it. Mom and dad are trying to help you. And I think that's one thing that sometimes we forget on this journey, right? We're so stuck on the diagnosis. But there's so many other things. There's so many, oh, he's aggressive because he's autistic. No, that's not why. The mold was giving him headaches. The mold was making him feel sick. He's not talking because he's autistic. No, that's not why. So I always say when parents reach out to me and they'll tell me, "Hey, I seen your video. I'm gonna try Leucovorin calcium." I tell them, be patient. Just be very patient. Do not be scared. If you do see something, reach out to your doctor. Anything has its side effects. You change, sometimes as an adult, you have too much coffee, you have the side effects of, being hyper. So just kind of going with the flow and just knowing that everything that we do is for his better and to improve his quality of life.
Do you think that there was something in particular that you felt Dr. Centers was the most helpful for you during that journey that you didn't share yet that you'd like to touch upon?
What I love about Dr. Centers is that we go in there and it's like I'm talking to someone I've known my whole life, you know? There is no wrong question when you are in his practice. There is nothing wrong that you can say, and there's nothing that he won't give you advice on. Dr. Centers, I'm doing this. What do you think? And then he'll give you his knowledge on that, or he'll let you know, X, Y, and Z. And I just love that he is about the whole body approach, and that's something that's been very difficult to find in my area. We do drive 3 hours to go see Dr. Centers. I want to emphasize that because when you find someone who is willing to put in the work for your child and willing to understand and dig deeper and order the tests and be available really 24/7, it's worth it. That 3 hour drive there, 3 hours back, 6 hour days, it's worth it. It really is. And I always tell parents, when you're looking for a physician, make sure that you ask them X, Y, and Z, interview them, interview them, because this is something that you're investing in. You're investing in your child's life, and you don't want to leave there with regret or I didn't get my questions answered. But overall, it's been a great experience with Dr. Centers. And Dr. Centers will tell you, when we first went, we were there for 30 minutes because that's all Ezra could tolerate. He tolerated maybe 10 minutes of being touched. That was it. Ezra is now there for 2 whole hours. It's great just to see that itself, the progress there. It's amazing.
Now I have a question for Ryan. Can you tell us about your own experience with folinic acid or using a biomedical approach for your own health journey?
I've tried a few different forms, folinic acid, and then also the methylated version. I totally understand what Dr. Centers is saying, especially since it's something that you have to take for a while to, notice the possible changes. Overall, I feel like I've tried all these things because I mentioned of my previous history. I just wondered, we're all trying to be, the best we can in the top 10%. So we look for the other things that we can take. And I feel like that was something that just helped me some with focus. One of the main reasons I got into this was going gluten and dairy free. I had a varicose vein in my leg that was giving me pain for 3 years. And, I went gluten and dairy free, inspired by these families. And, that pain of 3 years was gone in 2 weeks. That was just the beginning of my eyes opening to realizing what all sensitivities do I have, and, trying to gauge, listening to my body, because going through that, there's, others that I've encountered, and you find certain things that set someone off and they can change how they feel. If someone has vinegar or garlic, and it's something that, could give them light sensitivity or back pain, just change their whole demeanor. So with the foods, I encourage everybody to be their own detective. It's not like you have to have a diary about it, but just really start to be mindful of the things that, affect you on, everybody's sensitivities.
Can I speak about the side effects of leucovorin?
Yeah, sure. Go ahead.
So it's really important that if your child is taking leucovorin, that you be aware of the side effects, which may include hyperactivity, irritability. There are some strange side effects like spitting, and this is frequently with the leucovorin that's not excipient free. And even I've seen it with children who are on the excipient free leucovorin. They will spit because they have a metallic taste in their mouth. So usually when you see hyperactivity, irritability, spitting like behaviors, that's because the dose is a little bit too high. So what we usually do is we go back on the dose. So if your child is having those symptoms, you'll want to talk to your doctor and see if you can go down on the dose. Irritability can become worse and it can last for months. So
Okay.
you cannot just stop it. You have to taper it. Leucovorin is B9, vitamin B9. And all the B vitamins are something that feed yeast. So if you have not corrected a yeast problem or there's a mold problem in your house, this can make that much worse for the child. So that's why it's necessary to do those studies beforehand. Studies like organic acid test, mycotoxin test, and the DNA methylation testing.
We had a question from the audience about testing for leaky gut. Is that something that there is a method for and that you do?
The primary way to test for leaky gut is by looking for candida. And there's lots of different ways to look for that. And we usually use something called a functional organic acid test.
And the metallic taste in the mouth, does that have anything to do with heavy metals?
So when you're taking the leucovorin, it may push out heavy metals and you would have that taste. You would want to deal with the heavy metals before starting leucovorin. I am an osteopath, so we treat the body before we ever start leucovorin. Now, especially if there has been birth trauma to the skull. Now, the area in the brain where leucovorin enters the brain is in the lateral ventricles. There are these organs or these little tubes in the lateral ventricles. It's called the choroid plexus. And those are actually where the folate receptors are. And if that area is not working properly or the cerebral spinal fluid is blocked, leucovorin can actually make you a lot worse. So that's why you really have to be careful. And I really don't know what these doctors do who, don't look at these other things. 5-MTHF is also called Deplin. It's a drug. And it is better to use Deplin in certain methylation problems. You would have to have the DNA methylation testing done first to see if the child would respond to Deplin. It's very effective for depression, sadness, and apathy in children who have autism.
Is it different from methylated folate that's on the market as a supplement versus a folic acid supplement like we see at vitamin stores?
So the 5-MTHF, that one, it's an active form of folate, and it's different than folinic acid, but it affects different areas of the brain.
Than folinic acid does.
Mm-hmm.
But still more absorbable, more bioavailable, and better uptake than folic acid.
Absolutely.
Dr. Centers, can you tell us a bit about your success rate in addressing autism spectrum disorder and some success stories?
I would say about 80% of the patients with autism that we see improve significantly. And there's a small minority of patients that we can improve biomedically, but symptomatically they don't improve as much. Back in the 1970s, 1 in 10,000 children were diagnosed with autism. I think that those patients are perhaps those patients that were the 1 in 10,000 patients that they saw back in the 1970s. We did not have the technology that we have today. You need to do genetic studies, especially a chromosomal microarray. I would say about 90% or maybe it's 80% of the children that we test for chromosomal microarray testing, they have no positive deletions or mutations in their genome. But about maybe 1 in 100 will have a very rare mutation. And usually those are associated with autism. And I think that those are the patients that don't respond as well. But then sometimes what we can do is we can look at the genetics a little bit more and then tailor the biomedical approach specifically to the genetic problem.
What about additional supplements recommended with leucovorin?
So there are some supplements that we would give. For example, magnesium. We usually do testing, which helps guide us as to what supplement the child needs. L-carnitine or acetyl L-carnitine is another one that is very helpful when you're taking leucovorin. And there are other supplements, but it's really based on the child. Now, there are certain things that you need to do before you start treating a child with leucovorin, and that includes a complete blood count. You need to do a erythrocyte sedimentation rate. You need to do an RBC folate, and you need to do B12 levels, and you need to do methylmalonic acid levels, MMA, and then you need to do vitamin D3, and then you need to do a methylation profile. We usually do a methylation profile that's done by one of the commercial companies. Even a local lab can do some of the initial MTHFR, and usually it's much faster. We eventually will do the whole methylation profile, but to start off, we'll usually use like Sonora Quest or LabCorp to get the initial findings. Most kids do not need B12. Some children do. One of the things that we test for first is B12.
Do our kids need to be gluten-free, dairy-free for their entire life with this treatment? Or is there a point when the healing happens and their diet can shift back to include dairy and some gluten again?
There are many children that eventually can transition back to eating small portions of gluten and small portions of casein. But again, it depends on where the food is coming from. I always hear, I can't tolerate gluten, but I went to Italy and I could eat it there. So I think that there is absolutely a potential to heal, and eventually, I see a lot of these children living normal lives. On my website, which is drshawn.org, there's case studies of children that have recovered. And a couple of those patients have done amazing.
Real quick about Marsha, that I know that Ryan, he was mostly dairy free and somewhat gluten free. This was, a little bit before as much glyphosate was being applied to the wheat, though, so they got away with it more. But his diet is not super, like, he watches his diet these days, but I know that there's flexibility with it. And I'll just say with myself, that same problem that I had with the varicose vein and the pain, I used to go back and forth, trying gluten or dairy, having the pain, stopping it, starting it. Eventually, now I can have gluten and dairy, although it's always organic, and no pain symptoms come back, even with lots and lots of gluten and dairy that I shouldn't have. So, there is a potential, I do believe, to heal.
I also wondered, Dr. Centers, if you could comment on the size of your patient cohort that your 80% success rate speaks to.
I worked with hundreds, maybe thousands. I really don't keep a track of it. Here in Arizona, I try to limit the number of patients that I see so that I can focus more on the individual patient. When I was in California, we were seeing large amounts of patients. And the other thing that I wanted to say is Sarah is an amazing mother, and Ezra has an amazing father.
That's so nice to hear.
And this is the sweetest child you'd ever want to meet.
Watch the full version of the Restoring Balance autism documentary. You'll see the website, restoringbalanceautism.com. It's still up for a free screening on the site, so go check that out. You'll probably need to watch it more than once. There's a lot of information in there.
And I am on TikTok. I do share a lot of information on Ezra and her family, diet, and just overall improving the quality of life for Ezra. My TikTok is SarahVV8A, and I just want to encourage parents to trust your instincts and continue to learn and advocate for your children. We're constantly told that we can't do anything to better their lives, but there are people like us who are wanting to help our little ones receive the best quality of life out there.
Okay, great. Well, thank you to everyone for coming to our live panel today, and for your patience and for listening. And thank you for each of our panelists, Sarah, Ryan, Dr. Centers. This was an amazing panel. Again, I've enjoyed all the panels that you guys have been on, Ryan and Dr. Centers as well. And it was great to hear from Sarah today about your son's amazing journey. I wanted to thank Austin as well, and the CHD.TV team and CHD-AZ for hosting this. And we look forward to seeing you guys maybe in the next Q&A panel. And I hope you have all a great, wonderful evening, and look forward to hearing from you guys in the future.
There is more and more evidence that there is an immune inflammatory process going on in more than 80% of these children. Find a doctor who understands that autism is medical.
I forget that I see this kind of stuff every day, and I forget that people that don't see these kids every day and see them get better don't know that that can happen.
I started to read many, many journal articles. Come to find out there were many journal articles that the doctors weren't reading.
What's going on? Why is it going on? How did this happen?
Most of the research dollars were going into genetics, and I knew there had to be an environmental factor. Gluten intolerance is glyphosate poisoning.
We're bathed in chemicals. Look around you.
We're physically poisoning the earth, and we're physically poisoning the children.
You hear from your conventionally trained doctor that diet has no influence on autism. That's nonsense.
And if you can fix what's wrong with the gut, then your child can learn what they couldn't before.
So we start hitting new levels.
Within 48 hours, he had gone from completely nonverbal, no sounds that even remotely sounded like the English language, to speaking in sentences.
What's that from? What's that from?
Where's that from? Mr. Grasshopper. Which color wiring can do you like?
Flip the right switch and miracles can happen.
Oh my goodness, there's something I can do about this. This is an autoimmune disorder. This is a metabolic disorder. This is a digestive disorder.
It helped me with my life. It actually did. And I think that's just amazing.
And I strongly suggest you open your eyes to possibilities.
What we've done is taken away the things that held them back and made them sick and made them, unable to face the world. Now we're able to see who they really are, and it's beautiful. It's amazing.
Which is possible your child actually is a genius.